Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am Dylan Siegler, and I work at the Career Office and work with students and alumni and employers in the government and nonprofit sector. We're really excited to have 5 great panelists, and I just want to point out our 2 student coordinators who helped recruit the panelists and the lunch roundtable leaders, and we have Chris Quintos here and Michelle Smith. So they were really, really helpful and instrumental in pulling this together. Aaron Sweeney here, a Foreign Service Officer with the State Department, is going to be our moderator, and each of the panelists are going to introduce themselves and then answer some questions, and then we would love questions from you, so actively ask questions to the panelists. This is a great opportunity. I'm going to start with Karina Sanchez, if you want to step up here. Thank you.
My name is Karina Sanchez. I graduated from UFC back in 2001, and my major was political science and Latin American studies. Currently, I am the manager of external affairs for State Treasurer Alexi Janulius, who is also the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate right now. So I'm sure you probably have not seen the commercials. You'll be hearing about him very shortly. I basically began my career when I was in college. I used my ability of I'm like losing it. I used the ACER, I think it might be known on, or OLAS, to invite local elected officials just to talk about issues affecting not only students but the community. And from this, I made great connections. My first job out of college was working for the Speaker of the House, which is Michael Madigan. I had the opportunity to work on Lisa Madigan's campaign. It was a lot of grassroots work. From there, I went to work for Governor or ex-Governor Blagojevich as his House liaison. I know it's kind of like, ooh, but it was a great experience. I was actually on the House floor lobbying to pass bills that, improve the quality of life of Illinois residents. Then I was tapped to become Director of Policy and Community Relations for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations. I actually then did a little stint. I ran for office in the city of Chicago. I ran for alderman. Fortunately, I did not win, but it was a great experience, and I always tell everyone, try something new. Do not be afraid to fail, because by far the experience will be the best thing that you'll get out of it, and it will open so many doors. After that race, I was tapped by Treasurer Janulius, who was just starting his first term, and I've been with him for the last 3 years. It has been a great experience. Here and there, I tapped into his Senate race because I do work for the state. Everything that I do for him on the campaign side is during my own personal time, but I'm sure he's going to have a very successful bid come February 2nd, and hopefully, if all goes well, I will be taking a leave of absence from the state to work on the campaign, focusing specifically on Latino affairs. And again, she's coordinating the Get Out the Vote effort. Most of my experience, again, is really just organizing, mobilizing groups, getting legislation passed, finding out how we can get a certain issue that is important to a community addressed in a legislative way. Anybody who is interested in volunteering for any type of campaigns, if you have questions just to how to get started, again, I've had a lot of experience with that. I know a lot of good folks who are always looking for intelligent, smart, dedicated, and energized students, or pretty soon, or in a year or two, alumni, to help out in any way possible. So that's just a little short stint of what I've done and where I come from. And please, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. I always tell people, take advantage of the resources given to you. There will be a lot of people that you will come across in your life that would say, here's my card. If you ever need anything from me, if I can help you in any way, please give me a call. And I do it all the time. And I'm always surprised how people don't call. And if we say that, it's because we truly want to help you in any way possible to ensure that you are successful. So I know my contact information is in your booklet. You all have it. Feel free to email me with questions, anything that you have. I really want to help fellow UFC students succeed in any way possible. And in government, we always need people who are interested in being good public servants. So congratulations and best wishes for your future endeavors.
Hello, my name is Erin Rosa Cohen, and I graduated from the University of Chicago in 2004 with a Bachelor of Science in Geophysical Sciences, and now I work as a policy analyst for the government. I work for the federal government for the United States Government Accountability Office. We, for those of you who might not know, we are basically the federal government's watchdog agency. We have the right to audit or do a performance analysis on any federal program that gets money, or any program that a Congress member requests that we look into. And the way I came to this job is sort of a varied path. After I was done at U of C, I basically cold called 100 environmental geologist firms. And I spent 2 years as an environmental geologist digging up underground storage tanks at gas stations. And then I decided I would like a little bit of a change of scenery. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois at Chicago in urban planning and public policy. And that's really where I started to see that I could have a good role as a public servant for the federal government. I did an internship in Washington, D.C. with the United States Government Accountability Office, and I worked on auditing the Postal Service, which was really cool, actually. They're in a hot mess. And then I did my second year of graduate school, and the GAO offered me a position as an analyst, and I have been with them for a year and a half, 2 years, if you count my maternity leave. And it's a really great job. It's incredibly interesting. You can work on anything from the Postal Service to senior citizen abuse issues to actually going and investigating Border Patrol policy. Really, you name it, you can work on it. You get a lot of face time with federal officials, congressmen, state representatives even, because we do have some state reach too. I guess the way I got into it, the GAO really is by finding a mentor. She wasn't an alumni of the University of Chicago, but she was a GAO employee, and she was aware of the reach that U of C can have. And really, that's, I guess, what I would take away is, don't be discouraged if you get out of U of C and things don't fall into your lap right away. Make the calls that when people offer you their phone numbers or their contact information, find a mentor, and you too can audit the Postal Service.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pete Smith. I'm a captain in the Navy. I'm an intelligence officer. I've been in the Navy for about 28 years, which is about 24 years longer than I intended to stay in when I first got in. I was a history major at UC, and I graduated way back when. At the time I graduated, I was kind of intrigued by the military, but with my hair down to about here, had no intention of ever joining it. So I went back to Southern California, where I was from, had a variety of jobs over 2 years, including waiting on tables, hauling luggage, working at newspapers, and as I realized, I came to the realization that journalism really wasn't the career for me. I started looking more and more at military intelligence. And I looked at all the services. The Navy had the program that appealed to me the most. I went in planning to stay for about 4 years, but I guess I've liked it a lot more than I thought I would because it's been so long now. When I went in, my mother and my sisters were pretty horrified. My dad was very supportive and also very amused at the reaction of my mother and my sisters. But they've all come around, and they've been very supportive, particularly when they've really seen how well it's gone. I've been stationed a lot of different places. I've never done consecutive tours in the same location, so that means every 1 to 3 years, my family and I have been moving. I'm currently the Director of Intelligence at U.S. Strategic Command, which, believe it or not, is in Nebraska. So there actually are a lot of Navy people out there in eastern Nebraska, just south of Omaha. Please view me as someone to ask questions about the military in general, about Navy intelligence specifically, about Navy anything, about military anything, because I think I'm the only military person here today. And also I can probably field some questions about intelligence jobs in the civilian realm as well. If you're at all interested in any of those areas, I would strongly encourage you to talk to people who work in those areas, and also to go online and look at the web pages associated with all the organizations and fields that you're interested in. There's now really a great deal of information that's available electronically. And also, please view me as someone that you can call and just talk to. And also, something I didn't mention when I was here last year that I probably should have, based on some of the questions I got afterwards. If you're interested in the military, and like my mom and sisters, your parents are not particularly supportive of the idea, if you think it would be helpful for them to talk to me, please refer them to me as well. I'd be happy to speak to them about what a career in the military means. And lastly, kind of what UC did for me as a military officer, as a military intelligence officer, I think just to kind of keep it short, it really gave me an appreciation for the importance of getting to the heart of the matter, looking past the various, procedural stuff, doctrine and everything, and figuring out what's really important and diving into that. A lot of the procedural stuff, a lot of the doctrine is very worthwhile. A lot of it isn't worth the paper it's written on. And I think the fact that I have never, since I got in and I went to the initial intelligence officer school 27 years ago, I have not felt the need or the desire to get involved in any more of the training programs at the military officers in intelligence analysis, intelligence collections, anything like that. And the reason is because, frankly, I felt that the grounding I got here at UFC was more than enough, and I had everything I needed. So I look forward to speaking to you all today. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm David McCluskey. I graduated many years ago as a BA in political science. I first of all wanted to start off with saying, unlike I think a large percentage of the U of C undergrads, I was the first in my family to go to college, and I wasn't able to take advantage of paid internships while I was going through the U of C. I had to actually work for a living. So, in the summers between semesters at U of C, I was working in a factory. I worked at Colt's Firearms in Hartford. I was working at a vending machine plate doing sheet metal. But in my spare time in the summer, I was volunteering on campaigns. You may have heard of my senior senator, Christopher Dodd, in 1980. While I was working at Colt's Firearms, as a parts washer, I was after work. I was volunteering on his campaign and helped elect him. While I was at U of C, because really at the time I was going to the U of C, similar, although kind of a reverse tension that we're having in our politics today, it was kind of Carter versus Reagan, and there was a lot of tension going on. And although my father was a factory worker at Colts and active in his union, I really wasn't I was more of a poli-sci major. I had really no interest in the labor movement, but my roommate at the U of C, I was in the Pierce Hall. I don't know, did we demolish that yet? Okay. But anyway, he was like the opposite of me. He was from the West Coast. I was from the East Coast. His dad worked in management at Exxon Nuclear, and he told me at that time how great nuclear power was. We found out after I graduated they were dumping the nuclear waste in open trenches in Washington, right? But anyway. So he was a big Reagan guy. He was like really big, and I kind of just, being Irish, kind of reacted to that intense pro-management, pro-Republican, and I became more of a Democrat and actually more of a labor union supporter. I got my master's degree at Cornell University in Industrial Labor Relations, which I would encourage all of you is a great program, especially since it's a state-supported school, so it's half the tuition of Cornell, like arts and sciences. And while I was there, I was the campus coordinator for Jesse Jackson's 1984 race for president. After I graduated and at the time, I was really intentioned to be in the labor movement, but given we were in the middle of the Reagan years and unions were bad and evil and must be destroyed, there weren't a lot of jobs hiring. And quite frankly, let me just also say the labor movement wasn't actually doing too much interest in organizing new workers. They were kind of fat, dumb, and happy. And they really, when Reagan came in, it was just kind of, it was a shock to them. And only in the last 10, 15 years, unions have started to devote more and more resources to organizing new workers and are, in addition to the healthcare fight that they're very actively involved in, want to hopefully make it easier for workers to organize in unions. So after I graduated from Cornell, I worked briefly for the New York State AFL-CIO and then was trying to get a job in the labor movement, couldn't find one. And so I ended up kind of, as a consolation prize, I worked for a state senator in New York City. His name was Marty Connor. He was really great about that experience. I was in his district office. So I wasn't up in Albany passing legislation. I was doing the nitty-gritty stuff. And his district was really kind of cool at the time. Through redistricting, it's changed. I had the Lower East Side of Manhattan, so I had Chinatown. I had Louisiana. I also had part of the area I help him represent was the North Shore of Staten Island, which was very more suburban. And he also had part of Brooklyn, Red Hook, Carroll Gardens, and Williamsburg, which has a very strong, vigorous Satmar Hasidic Jewish population. And then after 2 years of working with him, I needed to move on because he wasn't the most pleasant person to work for. And so I moved back to my home state of Connecticut, and again, I was just looking for a job. And so I found one being a campaign manager for a state representative in a marginal district. He had won in a special election that hadn't been held by a Democrat in more than 20 years, and I helped him hold the seat. Unfortunately, he had backed the wrong person in a leadership fight, and so I was unable to continue employment there. Then I went back into the labor movement and got a job doing being a legislative liaison for the Connecticut State Police Union. Got very much involved in the fights they had, and helped not only pass legislation but help elect candidates. And after in 1996, there was an opening where I grew up for a state representative, and I thought I was going to run. And unfortunately, the speaker at the time's brother decided to run, and I said, you know, he's going to win. So I didn't do it, but turned out he only was going to be in for 2 years, and I was able to get elected. Currently, in my role as deputy speaker, I basically am in charge of the screening committee. So every piece of legislation that hits the floor of the legislature, I decide really with the speaker whether we're going to do it or not, and whether or not it needs to be fixed. What I would just say, two things. I mean, in elective politics, you know, I had a call about 2-3 years ago from a U of C master's student in public policy. She works for us now in our program review and investigations committee, which is full-time staff, and we charge them with investigating whatever issues the committee wants to do. Very broad, in-depth, you know, investigation. I was telling one of the students in the last session, you know, it's great because these guys are doing really great work, but at the end of the day, it has to pass through us. And I told her I've killed more of the legislative recommendations out of that committee than probably any other legislator. So, I mean, it's really a tension between, you know, doing the research skills that you've developed as undergrads with the practical of actually passing legislation. I've worked on public financing of elections, same-sex marriage, transportation issues in my state. And so I think it's really the skill set. It's not, you don't have to know everything. It's the Socratic method. It's your research skills that you've developed here at the U of C. And from my experience as a legislator and as formerly as a lobbyist, your skills that you've developed at U of C really kind of set you apart. And you know, it's not that you have to know everything. It's to know which questions to ask and how to ask it. And I mean, you know, as a jack of all trades, being a legislator, you know, you don't know everything. But you know, when you have the budget director or the governor come in and start saying something, and then all of a sudden you can ask him, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and all of a sudden you've kind of cut his legs out from under him. And those are the kinds of skills that you have because you know, you value debate, you value inquiry. And so you don't have to know everything. You just have to know to hone those skills. And quite frankly, I didn't know that I would be a legislator. I spent most of my time electing them, and all of a sudden I said, gee, maybe I should run for office myself. And unfortunately in politics, you know, you have to just prepare yourself for opportunities. As you may have seen in the paper, Senator Dodd, who I helped elect when I was at the U of C, has basically been forced to not run for re-election because of circumstances. Some are within his control and some are within not. And so that can be frustrating as someone who has a strong, you know, inquiry skills that, you know, there's a lot that's not based on merit in politics, but, you know, and then you never know, you can be the best person, but that doesn't mean you're going to be effective passing legislation, or because there's someone higher up the food chain who's going to stay in the legislature, like Chris Dodd as a U.S. Senator for 30 years. So you just have to prepare and be patient. But I think it's the skills that you have will prepare you for either being the staff person for a U.S. Senator or being a U.S. Senator yourselves. Thanks.
Okay, so as Dylan said, my name is Erin Sweeney, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I'm not going to say much about myself. I want to leave it mostly for our panelists today. But I will say I'm a Foreign Service Officer. I graduated from University of Chicago in 2005. Went to the Kennedy School of Government for my master's in policy and urban planning in 2000 and finished there in 2007, and then went straight into the Foreign Service, where I just finished my first tour in Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm heading to Bolivia in a few months for my second tour. As you can see, the panel we have here is pretty diverse. And government is kind of a really broad term. I mean, it can mean anything, basically. So I know the questions we're going to have are pretty diverse and maybe pretty specific to either state or federal or maybe even city. So I do want to give you lots of opportunities to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions that you think might be a little specific. There'll probably be other people in the room with similar questions. I do want to just start it and start asking some questions that I think are a bit more general and are questions that I get a lot from students interested in the Foreign Service for our panelists to get us started. And some of them did address this, so for those that didn't address this, if you could just say a little bit more about what experiences at the U of C, classes maybe that stand out, programs that you participated in at the U of C that you think really helped prepare you for a career in government.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I always knew I wanted to go into government. When I was going to college, I'm like, I'm majoring in political science and Latin American studies. This is what I want to do. Obviously, one of the classes I always remember, it was a class called Losers. I don't know if they still offer it. I loved it because it really just gave you a different insight to some of the other writers. But one of the things that, and I think the gentleman, David, was correct, is that U of C does teach you to think differently than other people. And you will be amazed when I've done very similar work, working on legislation or policy issues. You tend to ask the right type of questions that really get to the nitty-gritty of things. You tend to think outside of the box. And a lot of times that's very helpful, and people do see that and appreciate it. So at least from that sense, being at the U of C was challenging, but I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. One of the things that I did utilize, and like I mentioned earlier, was the student organization, because I knew I was very interested in the local politics. I used my position there to hold panel discussions, invite elected officials from congressmen to aldermen, and one of the things that allows you is for them to get to know you, and they'll remember you, and believe me, they'll keep their eye out for you when you graduate. And again, just taking advantage of those opportunities. If you are involved with a student organization, maximize it. I mean, organize events, invite people. Again, it really depends what type of work you want to do in government, because it is a very broad term. Like, I wanted to do the campaigning. I wanted to be out in the community, completely grassroots, door-to-door knocking. That was the kind of stuff that I enjoyed and still do for some odd reason in this very cold weather. But it's a great experience. If there's a word of advice that I will give you besides the take advantage when someone gives you their card and says, call me, and actually call them. If you can over the summer or any time, if there's a campaign, volunteer. Whether it's a day a week, whatever it is, volunteer and really get exposed to it to see if it's really something that you want to do. At least in, politics, it could be an interesting experience, and it's not made out for everybody. I think some people that I've seen get involved with it thinking that is something that they're going to want to do, and then they just don't like it. And they're like, if I would have taken opportunity when I was in college to do an internship, I would have known better. So I always tell people, if there's an area that you're interested in, just try it out through an internship or volunteering. Again, government, it could be from a very local in the city elections up to a U.S. race, federal. There's different things that you can experience. So dab a little bit into everything and take full advantage of all those opportunities.
I would say at the University of Chicago, in terms of a class that really prepared me not only for graduate school but also for my career now, if you have the opportunity to take the Little Red Schoolhouse, I don't know I believe they still offer it. It's a pretty classic course. That, if I could name one class that actually prepared me to do what I need to do in my daily life, it is that class. Writing and critical thinking are probably the most important skills that I took from the University of Chicago. And critical thinking can come from any class, really. Who can forget the little arguments that you get into in Hume class or Soc class? Even though those things might not seem important now, they are important, and your ability to think on your feet and, more importantly, be accountable for what you say. That's something that I have to do every single day of my life. And if I could touch on something that Karina said, she mentioned that you should take advantage of after-school group, or not after-school groups, but school organizations and any internship opportunity that you can. I would say that's definitely important. I didn't really do that. I just kind of did my own thing at U of C. I did dance, I did art, and it was okay that I did that, but if I could go back, maybe I would have had a little bit more to do with student government. Even though actually my job now is nonpartisan, and so I don't have to do I have nothing to do with political things. The GAO is non-biased, nonpartisan, and we make a big effort to stay that way. So I would say any way that you can, really bulk up your writing skills and your critical thinking skills, especially through if you can take the Little Red Schoolhouse class or even sit in on it.
I think in my experience, the writing and critical thinking skills really are key as well. The ability to look at a lot of information and figure out where your information gaps are, and then to take that information and figure out what's important about it, and then to effectively verbalize that or write about it in a way that a senior operating commander can understand it and get what he needs to get out of it is what it's all about in intelligence. And I got more than enough of that at UC. I think in thinking about it was painful, but actually getting beat up on papers I turned in, and that was pretty brutal. I got beat up here in ways I'd never experienced before in high school or anything like that. I came in here really thinking I knew it all, and I didn't. And it was professors, pretty ruthlessly in some cases, ripping apart, subpar stuff from me, and that has just, shaped everything I've done. Regarding the types of things that are worth focusing on for somebody who might consider the military, really right now in intelligence, it used to be that econ, history, things like that were the areas that we emphasized. But now it's everything. In fact, we're realizing we have a shortage of people with skills in hard sciences with the rise of cyber as a concern in intelligence. We need a lot more people with hard science skills than we had previously. And in my current job, cyber is one of the major realms that Strategic Command has the responsibility for, as is space, as is long-range strike. And those are all areas that require a lot more than just econ and history majors. So really, whatever you're doing, find something you're interested in and do your best at it. If you're out there and you have no intention of ever thinking about the military, maybe just try keeping an open mind. I think one of the things that got me intrigued initially happened here when I was a major in history, focusing on Latin America, and the professor assigned a book about the independence wars in Latin America. And I went home and blasted through it and realized I'd read through the whole thing in one night, which is something I never really did. But that kind of told me something about where my interests lie. It also told me things about areas that you might be worth focusing on. Learning about San Martin and Bolivar and Hidalgo and these other people really was just a revelation for me, and it kind of got that initial interest started, and I went from there. But so just do the best you can. If you're thinking about the military, it helps to stay in shape because that will be part of the application process. If you have opportunities to be in things in which you'll be in a leadership position, I would encourage you to do that. Not the fake kind of things like my daughter's having to go through right now to meet the new criteria for getting into college, but real things that you're interested in, organizations, whether it's social work, athletics, anything that would give you a chance to lead other people. I would encourage you to do that as well.
I'm just going to be real quick as people emphasize critical thinking and writing skills. As I said, you don't have to know everything. Every legislature, the federal government has unique governance structures. I mean, when I worked for New York legislature, how they did business was very different than how Connecticut did business. I would just say another thing in terms of the political side of government. It's not that you're always the smartest person or the most knowledgeable person. I have groups that come in to me all the time. If you only read this 25-page manifesto or watch this multimedia presentation, you'll do the right things. It's about organizing. You have to be able to talk to people, and in my business, in the legislature, it's all about getting 50% plus one. I got to put a bill up on the board, and I got to be able to have a majority of the votes to do it, and that means I have to talk to people. So it's not only being a well-researched, a well-reasoned argument, you have to actually talk to people and get them to support you. So in the political side of government, you really actually do have to talk to people, know what their interests are. Also, compromising is, in my business, not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because at the end of the day, I know I don't know everything, and I need to get those other people to agree with me, and sometimes that means I have to move towards their position.
I'm going to ask one other real quick question before I open it up, because this is a question I get all the time. How can you possibly defend policies that you don't believe in or you don't agree with? Now, all of us are at different levels. Some of us are career, meaning we're hired regardless of the administration, and we have to stand in front of a lecture hall of 1,000 students in Lagos and defend the Iraq War, or make other statements that, whether we agree or not, is irrelevant, because that's our job. Where others of us are the ones who are actually making the legislation, but may have to defend things of the party that they may not agree with. So all of us face it in our everyday jobs. And so I want to ask people on the panel if they ever face those problems of defending policies they don't agree in, and how they do that.
I guess one of the benefits of working for the GAO, like I said before, is that we're nonpartisan, and so often I don't find myself in a position where I have to defend the administration's policy, because we work for Congress, and part of the way we work with Congress is they'll make a request. How about you study defense money spending in Iraq? We then take it to our agency and shape the job so that it will not, so that it can't be perceived as being political. And that's one of the reasons why I like the agency I work for so much, is that it's not political, as odd as that sounds. But also, everyone who comes into a job for the government is going to have personal beliefs about the administration's policies. And one of the things about our agency is each person who works for it, it's not that we have to set aside our beliefs when we come into the door of work. It's that we have to keep an open mind, and we look at the hard numbers, we look at the actual evidence when we make recommendations to Congress. And so that's one of the great things about working for the agency, the GAO, is that I don't have to depend on any sort of political bias to help me make a decision. I actually get to spend a year to research and analyze both sides of the story on really any policy issue. So that's kind of an answer to the question, but kind of not.
Interesting question. For good reason, there are rules about to the extent we're supposed to be questioning policy in the realm that I work in. And I will say I personally have never been in a situation where I've come up against some kind of philosophical aspect of something that I've been asked to do that really brought me to the point of thinking about not doing it. I guess the two things I can say is whatever we're asked to do, it's important to do it as effectively as you can, and avoid blowing smoke. Don't, particularly when you're talking to the people that you work with, don't come up with smoke blowing, kind of BS-ridden explanations for things. Just tell them what you got to get done, and help map out the most effective way towards that.
Again, from my political experience, I think you have to pick your battles. Not every issue is one where you have to feel that conflicted when you're articulating a certain representing a group that not necessarily in agreement with you. Give you an example. When I was a freshman legislator, there was a issue on the board which was a silly issue, and it was being advocated by one of the leaders, and I was just a freshman legislator by the leaders. It was a stupid bill, right? it was almost ready to go down in defeat. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, now it's a stupid bill, but it's my leaders. And so I flipped my vote and it ended up passing. Now, as it turned out, because there are, checks and balances in government, it never saw the light of day in the Senate, right? So I think sometimes I've been a kind of a Dr. No. I mean, when my leadership has wanted me to do things that I thought was bad, I held out. I just said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll give you another example. In 2003, my leaders cut what I thought was a real bad deal, throwing thousands of poor people off of health insurance in a deal with a Republican governor. I said, I'm not going to do it. And not only did I not say I wasn't going to do it, I got up on the floor for about 2 hours of debate, and I broke her caucus, and I got a majority of the Democrats to support me against her. And that kind of hastened her kind of losing her power. So I think it's a balancing act. Sometimes you have to know, is the issue that you know is wrong something that's a matter of conscience and principle? And because there are checks and balances often in the system, you don't feel too bad sometimes if you vote for or support things. As I was saying earlier, I also work for the labor movement. Sometimes in labor unions, we defend workers that we know are wrong, right? But because management didn't terminate the worker the right way, oftentimes you'll find maybe not in the military, but in the private sector, there's been a screw-up employee for years and years, and they've been letting them away, being incompetent or just whatever, not being a good worker. And then all of a sudden there's that straw that broke the camel's back, and then they decide they're just going to get rid of them. But because they didn't do the work of doing an oral warning, counseling, and a written reprimand, then we have to defend them because their procedural rights were violated. So I think you have to know what you're defending. Are you defending the person's procedural rights? Are you defending principles?
And I'm sorry I didn't answer right away. It's just I needed to think about how I would develop my answer, because I have been very involved in local politics here in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. And I think for me, and I've gotten into some interesting situations, and that is the reason why I actually ran for office. And even my decision to run for office was at first supported by my then boss, who was the secretary of an agency, but then at that moment to the governor, only to turn around and for them to change their minds. But I think you have to get involved in an area where you share the same goals and visions, especially in government. I mean, if you're looking for a mentor and they're always out there, make sure you're going to someone that sees the world similar to how you see it, that you're not going to be clashing all the time, because if you're going to have to work with them, you do not want to compromise your own ideals, your own values. So I've been very lucky that my first mentor out of college, she was a fellow Latina, she was an elected official, very young. We see the world in the same way. And as I was moving through my career, when I decided to run for office, first was like, yes, here's our support, only for them to turn around. And I was actually being supported by the unions. Back 2 years ago, there was a big battle between the mayor and the unions about Walmart. And I've always thought about, the unions created the middle class, and there is definitely a discrepancy right now and an uneven balance between the haves and have-nots, and I was all about the unions. And I ended up losing my job. I was they said, if you run for office, you're no longer going to have this job, because you can essentially, in the state of Illinois, take a leave of absence, unpaid leave of absence, and do any type of political work. And at that point, I said, well, SCREWEDU, and I'm out of here, I'm running for office. So you sometimes do have to take a stand for what you believe, but people will respect that. But at the same time, make sure that in whatever area you're going to, whomever you're going to be working with, you really have the same visions and goals, because you do not want to be clashing all the time. I've had the ability, just working for the Speaker of the House. I would work with different legislators, and I was assigned to legislators that were working in communities that were important for me, and I was able to work on legislation that was very important for me. I met lobbyists whom I knew shared the same values as I did, so when there was legislation out there that may not be the best legislation, I would work with them and tell them, hey, heads up, this is coming up, you may want to just kind of focus on this. But at least I've been very lucky that I've never, except for that situation, put in a circumstance where I had to kind of go against what I truly value, my ideals, just because I've been good in aligning myself with people that hold the same values. So if that'll be of any help.
Great. So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. We have about 25 minutes or so for questions. I asked when you ask the question, raise your hand and I'll recognize you. And please stand and try to ask as loud as possible. If you can't hear in the back, please let me know and I'll restate the question so you can hear. So questions. Yes, back there.
Captain Smith, this one's for you. I'm just wondering what kind of collaboration you've experienced in the intelligence community, both in, the StratCom and other agencies, and whether people often move between them, especially between military and civilian.
That's a good question. Collaboration has become a huge part of what we do. A lot of it's due to the fact that, particularly since the end of the Cold War, our focus has been spread over a lot more topics than it used to be. When I came in, the United States Naval Intelligence was pretty much solely focused on the Soviet Navy, and now, we're focused on everything. We have naval intelligence officers running around the hills of Afghanistan supporting the SEALs. We have them unconventional, conventional things, everything. And as we've spread apart, that means we have had fewer bodies to devote, within our own organization, the same thing within the other services and the civilian agencies. So a big piece of that is the old stovepiping that we used to do is no longer satisfactory. For example, in the Cold War, the Air Force had a huge analytical effort devoted to tracking Soviet long-range aviation. The Navy did too, so did some civilian agencies. We can't afford that kind of duplication anymore, so now we have to start collaborating. And the thing that, one of the things that's really facilitated that, in addition to us just coming to the realization that we needed to do that, and General Powell was one who really helped that process along a lot when he was head of the Joint Staff, is what's happened, the revolution in communications. The idea now that we can communicate with all these tools in the classified realms, chat, BTCs, email, everything, it has made it very possible for analysts sitting in several nodes throughout the world to work with each other. Now, talking about this topic right now is kind of timely because we just had a breakdown in collaboration where things didn't go ideally. Nothing's perfect. I will tell you though that having gone through a number of Intel failures myself, the process generally comes out of it a lot stronger because it forces us to sit down, it humbles all the organizations involved, gets them to admit their mistakes and press on with an enhanced plan. So really, cooperation, collaboration is a huge part of what we do. There is a lot of movement between organizations. A lot of civilian analysts right now have prior military experience. A lot of civilian analysts go from CIA to DIA to NSA. That kind of thing happens. So that's very common as well. It's a lot more fluid now than it used to be.
Okay, next question. Yep, right here. Okay, real quick, yeah.
One, can you answer your own question? Oh, my name's Julie, by the way, about defending policies that don't necessarily align with what you believe yourself. Question about in the GAO, can you pick your own projects at all? To what extent? And Captain Smith, could you talk a little bit more about civilian intelligence?
Okay, so the first question, as far as defending policies you don't agree with in the Foreign Service, you do this on a daily basis. It's difficult because I've now worked for 2 administrations that have very different policies, and you have to defend it. And I wasn't a public affairs officer. I wasn't the one standing in front of the cameras defending it. But in everyday life of going to a happy hour, and you have people run up to you and say, "Oh, the war. What do you think?" You're constantly being challenged to say what the administration's policy is, whether you agree with it or not. Now, I didn't have too much of a problem doing this because I always remembered that I was working for the United States government as an entity and not for individuals. And when you start thinking about it like that you're working for a bigger thing than an administration, it makes it a lot easier to kind of think about you're defending the U.S. government and the U.S. government policy and not individuals. And your opinion really doesn't matter because you're constantly representing the government as a whole. There are times when you face something you really just won't stand for. And I had one policy that I just adamantly don't agree with and refuse to participate in, which is refusing visas to people who have AIDS. And whenever I had an HIV positive applicant who was otherwise qualified for the visa, I'd leave the window and ask my my boss to do the visa refusal. You can do things like that. I mean, if there are policies you don't agree with. So there are some opportunities for your small little victories, but they don't really make any policy changes on the big stand.
Yes, to answer your question at GAO, you do have some element of control over what projects you work on. The way, just to quickly answer this question, when you enter the GAO, you enter as sort of into this development program, and it takes 2 years. You're still a full-time, analyst. And in your first 2 years, you get rotated among teams, and the way that the GAO organizes their projects are into teams. So, for example, one team is called physical infrastructure, and they do everything having to do with transportation. And so just in that team, you can choose what project you want to work on. And in your 2 years, you get rotated among different teams. And so I've worked for GAO now for, I guess, 2 years or year and a half if you count my internship and then my maternity leave. And I've worked on 2 jobs for the Postal Service. First, analyzing recycling initiatives. The second, analyzing their delivery efficiency. And I've also worked on senior citizen retirement issues. So completely different. And then when I finish my first 2 years officially at GAO, I will get to choose which team I go on. Since my specialty in graduate school was transportation, I will try to get a transportation geared project. But the great thing about the GAO is that, there's such varied work. I mean, I share an office with people who work on healthcare issues, who work on telecom issues, who work on the Postal Service. Really, you name it, we work on it. You just get a lot of opportunities to learn, even if you're not officially on that job. There's a lot of opportunities to learn what's going on in that issue area. And so, yeah, I mean, yes, more or less, you do get to choose what you get to work on.
For civilian intelligence jobs, a very general level, they break out in 4 major areas: analysis, collection operations, administrative part of it, and research and technology. I think there are more things out there, more agencies and organizations out there in civilian intelligence than most people appreciate. They're the big ones that you've heard of: DIA, CIA, NSA, things like that. All places with great jobs, greatly in need of good people. But there are also places, each of the services has their own service intelligence organization. For the Navy, it's the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C. Their manning is about 80% civilian. Then there are a lot of other things more specialized, like Office of Naval Research, Naval Research Lab, and the other services have their own realm of their own variety of those as well. So a lot of good things, a lot of requirements for people with different backgrounds: hard science, econ. I will break out foreign language, though, as an area that really can help you a lot if you're interested in getting work in intelligence. And so I just encourage you to look around, check the websites out, talk to people, find out what the organizations have to offer. Some of them have good internship programs for undergraduates that might be of interest to you, and also allow you to get a security clearance ahead of time, which would really be great once you graduate. And lastly, one point that comes up is a lot of great civilian analysts are prior military, and having that prior military experience helps, but is by no means essential. A good example, one of the top analysts right now at the Office of Naval Intelligence regarding one of the key countries that we're focused on, who is involved in analyzing their naval, submarine, and Marine Corps operations, is a UC graduate, graduated the same time I did, never worn a uniform a day. He just ended up there after a couple of other jobs, and now he's doing great. So it's that ability to think, read, everything we've been talking about that's most important.
Okay, next question.
My name is Danny. This is for you, Captain Smith. Why did you choose the Navy? Was it something about the Naval Intelligence Program, or was it the officer candidates for commitments?
A couple of reasons. One of the big ones was that the Navy at the time, and I'm not sure if this is true anymore, for people going to officer candidate school, the route that I came in from, the Navy offered the surest guarantee. I went in and I took the test, I did the interviews, I did all the other stuff, and the idea was once I met the standard that they had, they gave it to me in writing that if I went through officer candidate school and completed it, I was going into intelligence. I did not have the same guarantees when I looked at the other services. That may be different now, But that was one of the reasons. Another reason is I'm from San Diego. I kind of grew up with maritime stuff. My dad was in the Navy in World War II, and so just kind of intrigued by that. But Navy's great, but the other services have great intel organizations as well. And in the case of the Army and the Air Force, much bigger than the Navy's.
Okay, next question. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Amelia. I'm sitting here. I have a question. One question, one extension, one for Kevin. I'm currently interning at the campaign, and there's a lot of voter turnout work and donor research work, but I have some ideas on both the politics side and the policy side. How do you approach your higher-ups or introduce those types of ideas?
Who are you? Is Andy in the office? I know, we're like really specific. Okay. I would just say, just walk over and introduce yourself, and because one of the things in politics, and yeah, you have to talk. In even government, I think there's a sense of social skills that people have to have, because it's not just researching. I know when people are like social skills, you have to have that ability to talk, and you will impress people by just going up to them and saying, "Hi, I am so and so, and I'm a volunteer, and I'm interested in this." Believe me, even if they don't take it, which if they don't, I'll question their intelligence. They will remember you, and they'll say, "Oh, you know what? I remember this young lady who came up to me." And I know that's what always happens to me when people come up to me and say, "Hey, I have an idea," even if I don't think it's a good idea. I value the ability that the fact that they had the ability, put their fear aside, and came up to me and talked to me. So just go up to them, say hello, and say, "Hi, I've been volunteering, and this is kind of the suggestion I have." So first of all, thank you for your help, because I know every little bit helps. I'm sure you're having a fabulous time, and get enough rest before February 2nd.
And Stephanie said, I know military contractors don't have like the best reputation right now, but is there any like translation or intelligence contract work available?
Yeah, there's a great deal. I can't claim to be an expert on how much of it is specifically for the Navy, but for the Department of Defense, yes, there's a great deal. And I'm glad you asked about that, because this is an area that there's been a lot of bad mouthing in the military. It's an easy thing for sensationalist coverage to jump on. You know, why don't we have more translators on it? It's a tough thing, and I will tell you that contract linguists are doing great work, and there's a reason why we rely on them. It's a very valid one. It would be nice if we had more linguists in uniform, but on the other hand, what if we, trained 2,000 uniformed linguists to speak Serbo-Croatian during the Balkan conflict? Okay, now we've got all those guys, and we don't really have that requirement anymore. So the United States, unique among all the militaries of the world, because we focus on the whole world, needs to have flexibility, and contract linguists give us that flexibility. So you can find horror stories where things didn't work out well, but I personally have worked with contract linguists who have done outstanding work and really done great service to the country.
And I'm sorry, what was your name again? Leon? Okay. Do me a favor, next time you're in the office, ask for Andy and be like, "Hi, Andy. Karina said to come and see you and say hello." And that'll help you start your conversation, okay?
Okay, yeah, over here.
My name's Chris. I have a question. So let's say your ultimate career goals is working in the government. What sort of limits are those goals set by not or having or not having a law degree? And in the same sense, is there any way to sort of replace that law degree with, let's say, graduate degree in a certain subject?
I'll answer that. At least for the GAO, you do not have to have a law degree. You do have to have a master's degree, but that's pretty common in any government agency right now. And you can actually have a master's degree in many different things. You don't have to have a master's degree in public policy. That happens to be something that most of the new staff in my agency have right now, but it's not required. So having a law degree, not having a law degree is not a barrier.
And I'll add to that, with the Foreign Service, you don't even need a college degree. You need a high school diploma. So it's one of the few agencies where you actually don't need to have a master's degree. But I will say that in the class that I joined with of 68 people, I think 64 of us had master's degrees. So it is becoming quite common, but a lot of the people I work with don't have degrees. So, anybody else on that? Okay, next question in the back. Yeah.
Well, this is a question for Representative Husky and Sanchez. I just wanted to talk about either a common misconception people have, or a common misconception, or just a misconception you have about how politics work, and how you came to realize that that's not actually how things work when you're trying to do it.
Well, I think the biggest misconception is everything's about conflict. I would say 80 to almost 90% of the legislation that passes in Connecticut is done with Republican votes. The Democrats have the majority in both the House and the Senate. Some other legislatures may not be as consensus driven. We do have this kind of culture in Connecticut about which I think is a good one, of not necessarily being overtly partisan. So I think that's the biggest misconception people have as Connecticut residents, that we're always fighting like cats and dogs. I mean, quite frankly, I've worked with colleagues that have good ideas, right? If they're not violative of my principles, they just happen to be Republican, I'm going to embrace them, because guess what? It shows a level of comedy that allows me, maybe when I need something, then maybe I'm not going to get their vote on exactly what I want, but maybe working with them, I can get them to agree on partly what I want.
Hello? Okay. I think what I learned is that things are not as easy as you think they are. A lot of people get mad at politicians. Why isn't he doing this? Why isn't he getting this done now? Well, there's a process, and it can be a very long, intricate process. Things take time. There is a lot of compromise that goes into a bill or legislation. Even the simplest things has to be worked out, talked to, researched, analyzed by a number of different people. I know for state representatives, it's a very challenging position because you're up for office every 2 years. You're being sworn in, guess what? You're already campaigning because you got to get signatures and filed by the end of that year, because then the following year you're already in election, and it's like ongoing all the time. So I work with state representatives. I feel for them. I mean, they're constantly campaigning all the time. The job is not easy. It's a very thankless job, and people are very quick to point the finger. And people have to understand that a lot of people are trying the best that they can. At the end of the day, there's still a bureaucracy. It takes time. So for me, I went in there like, okay, let's get this done. Let's get the party started. And I was like, oh my God, things take time. And unfortunately, it's not so much that the people or the elected officials don't want to get something through. It's just that really there is a process to things. When it comes down to campaigning, people, the apathy, it's very sad. And I think I always thought that people just basically understood government affects every part of your life, from what you're paying in taxes, for what you're wearing, to what is on the shelves, everything. And people don't really, I don't want to say don't appreciate it, but really don't understand it. And when you're out there doing the groundwork for a campaign and really trying to engage the people and say, look, this is why this issue is important for you. Obviously, to you, it makes sense, but there's so many people that really don't understand what that person, that individual that they're going to elect can really, and how they can really affect their life. And I think for me, sometimes the frustrating part of it is that they don't realize what that vote can actually do. And it really is, every single vote counts, because it's not, especially like a statewide election. I mean, you're broken down into precincts, and a precinct can be a block, 10 blocks, it matters. And if you lose one vote per precinct, that can make or break your whole election. So I think people just really don't understand all the work that goes behind it, all the hard work that a lot of people, especially elected officials, do put into it. And I always say this, they will remember you for that one bad thing that you do, but they'll never remember the 10 great things you did for them. So you have to be in it for the right reasons. And it's a constant challenge every day, but I think when you look on it, you're there because you're really trying just to improve the quality of life for a lot of people. So hopefully that answered your question somewhat.
Next question. Yep, also in the back. Oh, sorry.
Are you dealing with gridlock in government? Daily work in government often really tedious and difficult to make meaningful change and work really slowly, like you said. So how do you deal with that?
I'm sorry, is that directed at anyone specific or in general? I think it's just being focused, knowing what your end goal is, and knowing that although it will take some work, you know where you're going. Sometimes you have a piece of legislation that you know it's great, it's gonna just make everybody so much happier and so much better, but you know that based on the certain politics of the time or the certain administration may not pass, but it's just really just staying focused and trying to maintain a most positive attitude that you can and a smile on your face, because I know, especially on the Capitol, it can kind of get tedious. But as long as you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you're just maintaining a steady pace, that kind of helps me.
I would just add, in terms of the legislative process, it's designed not to do things fast. And there's a checks and balance. We have in Connecticut, we have a public hearing process that has to go through multiple committees, multiple chambers. It's a way to slow things down so that you're not kind of just getting swept up in the tide. We had a very horrific murder of a family in Connecticut, and all of a sudden people just wanted to go crazy on criminals. But we slowed the process down. We actually had hearings, and we actually ended up doing the right thing instead of just responding to that public clamor to do something. But sometimes doing something is doing something stupid, and so it is a very frustrating process. But I worked with the state police union for 8 years. There's competing interests, right? I can't do everything. We have limited tax dollars. I can't have the most comprehensive senior program, transportation program, environmental program. So there's this tension, and it's designed like that the issues that matter the most are the ones that kind of come up to the top of the field. So there is a reason why the process is like that. Now, I would just add too, I think it does depend on the state and on the federal government. You have to be able to talk to everyone, okay? You don't have to agree with everyone, but you can't, reflexively assume. Actually, this is to a previous question. Don't assume that the legislator or the advocate you're talking to is going to agree with you all the time because you've known that he's agreed with you on other issues. We've had situations in Connecticut where a Republican legislator, because of a personal interest, got up on the floor and said, I support the legalization of medical marijuana because of a very personal experience she had with her spouse who had cancer. So I think that's the other thing that, there's unnecessary battle lines being drawn sometimes between the parties, or even within the Democratic Party between liberals and conservatives. Don't assume that that someone who may on occasion disagree with you on every other issue be disagreeing with you.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes left, so let's get some more questions. Yeah, Ray.
I can talk about my agency in that there is a lot of room for promotion, which comes with different responsibilities. Just to quickly, I don't know how interested you are in the nitty-gritty of it, but you come in as an entry-level analyst. In your first 2 years, you get 4 promotions and raises, which is pretty sweet. And then after that, there's basically 3 more opportunities to move up. But within those sort of like official promotions, you can start as sort of being just a sort of a, analyst that's going to help run the job. And then you can move up to actually running the job, reporting to actual members of Congress, reporting to the Comptroller General, who is the head of the GAO. And so just personally, I feel very good and excited about my opportunities to move up, to get paid more, which I know is really what everyone cares about, and to have more opportunities for leadership. And so I feel really good about what I'm looking at for the future.
We'll take you right here. What's yours? Oh.
I'm mainly interested in foreign service and foreign affairs, so could you maybe explain what you did and what you're going to do as a political officer?
Sure. Okay, there was a question over here. Yep.
I have a similar question. Like, what was your average day in Nigeria?
Okay. Okay, so same question. So that means we get to take 4. Okay. Yeah. Here.
This is mainly from Mr. McCluskey. I don't know how the Connecticut State Legislature works, but I know in my home state of New Jersey, it's a part-time legislature job. So I was just wondering how you would manage that being a part-time legislature, and if you need to actually work work for a living, what you would do, how you would make ends meet with the other part-time.
Okay, and there was a hand, yeah, in the back. Yes, you.
I was just wondering for average spend your average day in an office.
Okay. Okay, real quick, yeah, just because I hate to have a hand there.
Two of you stationed abroad, I'm just sort of wondering how you manage family and personal life if you have to travel and you don't have much control over where you go.
Okay, so I'll answer those, the first and the last question real quick. Average day, was it average day getting into the Foreign Service and personal life? Okay, getting into the Foreign Service is a long test process. Unlike some of the other agencies, it really doesn't matter what your degrees are or what your, it matters what your experiences were, but it's all based on a test. So you take your written test, you take the oral test, and then if you pass those tests, you take the medical test and the security clearance. If you pass those, then you're put on a roster, and from the roster, the people with the highest test scores are selected to join the Foreign Service. If you have a lower test score, you may never be offered a position, so you start all over with the written test, the oral tests, and go through the process again. For me, I joined with a student program called the Pickering Fellowship. For those of you, I think it's now also a third year you can apply, although I think the application deadline is very soon. So if you are a second or third year looking for fellowship opportunities with the State Department, please see me afterwards and I can talk to you more about that. February 8th is the deadline. Typical day in Nigeria, the beauty of the Foreign Service is that you're a generalist, meaning you have every post you have a completely different experience, a completely different job. So in Nigeria, I happen to be a visa officer, so typical days for me were at a visa window pretty much all day. But doing American services work, kidnapped Americans, trying to rescue them and get them back to the States, abducted children, trying to reunite them with parents, things like that, which are a little bit more interesting. But in Bolivia, I'll be doing political work where I'll be out in the Amazon talking to indigenous populations and writing cables back to Washington telling them what's going on in Bolivia, basically informing DC so DC can make policy decisions. And having a personal life, it's really tough. I mean, if you have a family especially, I mean, I'm lucky in a sense that I don't, because traveling overseas, moving every 2 years, I'm going through it right now, and we were talking about this earlier, it's painful. I mean, it's really hard to rip, you create this life for yourself in a country, you're involved, you're part of American Women's Club, and you do Girl Scouts, and you do all these things, and then you leave. And you have 10-year-old girls, crying, holding onto your leg, and now you gotta go to DC for 8 months. That's not really long enough to do much. And then you start all over somewhere else. It's difficult, but a lot of people with families, and I'll leave this for the captain because he does, so he can talk more about this. Some people find it really enriching for their children to be able to move and travel around the world, be exposed to a lot of cultures. There's a lot of opportunities for spouse employment overseas at embassies, so a lot of spouses really enjoy it. And the best thing I'll say about the Foreign Service is if you hate your boss, or you hate your job, it's only for 2 years at the maximum. So if you really like change, it's a great job, because every 2 years you have a new job, a new country, a new boss, and new coworkers. So
I would just say Connecticut's like New Jersey in the fact that we're officially a part-time legislature, but we met every month last year because of the budget crisis. It's becoming more and more perceived by the public as being full-time. What's that doing? I do have another job. I work as a union staff person for the Connecticut State Employees Association. But given the demands on the job now of being a legislator, we're attracting a lot more real young people like your age, literally, we have a state rep who graduated Wesleyan University last year. He beat a long-term incumbent. Why? Because he did his work and it was a good election cycle. And then we're attracting a lot of people that are either personally wealthy or retired. So things are changing in Connecticut because even though we are officially a part-time legislature, it's becoming more of a full-time body, and as a result, it's changing who comes into. So and we have public financing in Connecticut, so if you want to run for office, we help you raise the money to do that.
With regard to what my typical day consists of, it's varied depending on what job I had. Real quickly, my first job as a junior officer was the intel officer for a bomber squadron on an aircraft carrier. That tour included operating off Lebanon when we bombed Syrian gun positions. After that, I went to South America by way of language school in Monterey, California. I was initially on I was an analyst on the staff of Southcom headquarters in Panama City, and then after that, I went to El Salvador for 2.5 years in a liaison position where I worked between the Salvadoran Armed Forces and the American country team and agencies back in the States. After that, I worked at the Office of Naval Intelligence for about 3.5 years on the watch and in the International Cooperation Department. After that, I went to Bahrain, where I worked for Fifth Fleet as a head of analysis at the Fifth Fleet staff. Then I went to San Diego, where I was the assistant intel officer for the Kitty Hawk carrier group. We deployed to the Persian Gulf during that time for operations in the water and also with our airplanes flying over Iraq. After that, I went to, I was the naval attaché in Croatia for 3 years. It was a wonderful position. I lived in Zagreb. Then after that, I was the intelligence officer for the Abraham Lincoln Battle Group, a carrier that deployed out of Everett, Washington. And that tour included a deployment to the Gulf when we went through that shock and awe initial portion of Iraqi freedom and also OEF in Afghanistan. Then I was the assignments officer for naval intelligence, working again in Middle America at the Naval Personnel Command outside of Memphis. Then I went to San Diego, where I was the intel officer for 3rd Fleet, which is largely a training command to get our forces ready for deployment. Then for 3 years, I was the intel officer at U.S. Pacific Fleet in Hawaii, which was a wonderful job in more ways than Hawaii. I got a chance to work with the countries that we work with closely in the Western Pacific and also in the Indian Ocean. And then last summer, I came to Strategic Command, where I'm the Director of Intelligence. And in that job, typical day, I'll come into work around 5 or 6 in the morning, read through all the classified and unclassified internet type things we have with stuff there to read, and get a morning briefing, then go through a series of meetings and things like that for the rest of the day. It can vary a lot from day to day. I've got 300 people working for me right now. About 70% of them are civilians, and the rest are uniformed military. So a lot of variety, and again, no 2 jobs in the same place, all good stuff. With regard to relocating, that is one of the challenges that you really need to keep in mind if you want to get into a part of the military or the civilian intelligence services that involves a lot of travel. I guess just a couple of big points to consider. It helps to ensure that your spouse is aware of and enthused about the idea of it as well. If guys or women plow into a job without really getting their spouse involved, if you're married at the time, and it turns out they don't like the idea, then it really can be a difficult life. Also, just keeping your kids apprised of kind of where everything is and staying constructive. Don't be a whiner about it. Emphasize the positive aspects of moving around. One of the things to consider for both State Department and the military is that, Aaron, I'm not sure what your experience is, but I think the government takes pretty good care of us when you're on those overseas tours. As the naval attaché in Zagreb, I lived like a king. I lived like a king in El Salvador. I lived nicely in Bahrain. I mean, just nice housing. They have good schools. Your kids will go to private schools that are better than most things you could afford stateside. And the work is fascinating. So again, it's something to think about whether that's really what you want or not. If it is, I strongly suggest press ahead. Moving is painful. I won't try to, sugarcoat that. But the opportunity to work in all these different places and different wonderful countries and stuff is worth it.
Great. Well, before we thank you, I just wanted to ask one final question, which is that we at the Career Office at CAPS can always tell you, networking, research, all of these things. Here are our consistent suggestions for how to get a job in government or other areas. So I just wanted to ask each panelist very quickly if you had one suggestion, 1 or 2, for students interested in careers in government, what would that be?
I think I said it before. When someone offers to help you, take it. If they give you their card, follow up through it. Make sure you yourself have a business card. Even if it's just a student, you yourself, if you don't already have it, have a business card to hand out to.
The way I got my job is in grad school, we would have a lot of readings that were they were recommendations and studies by the GAO, and it occurred to me I could work for them. And so I did some research on the internet, found that they were hiring interns, and then that's when the advice about calling people and networking comes in, is because when you're applying to a non-elected government agency, you want to make sure that your name rings a bell with the people who are making the staffing decisions. So keep your mind open. You never know, like things that you're reading that might be at a place that you can, or a contact that you can actually work for.
Having said that the Foreign Service is a test-based entry process, it is. But what I will say is that once you're in the Foreign Service, you really want to distinguish yourself from the other officers because everyone thinks they're the best diplomat ever. So you need to really distinguish yourself from all the other really great ones. And the way I suggest doing that is if you do an internship, even if you're a first tour visa officer, you make a really strong impression. You work really hard because there's a lot of people in the Foreign Service who don't, who say, well, I'm going to leave at 4 every day and I get paid the same amount of as the person next to me who's doing twice as many visa interviews. It's noted that you're doing twice as many visa interviews. And, my internship when I was, I started my internship 2 days after I graduated from University of Chicago, didn't know at all what I was doing and made such strong impressions that I'm now friends with all the the assistant secretaries and all of the Africanists. So you can really make a strong stand right from the start in your internship. So take it seriously. It's a really big opportunity.
Just 2 recommendations for somebody who's thinking about military work or intelligence work. Do well at everything you do. The things that really count when they look at your application packages, and I mean it, is that they look at the quality of what it is that you've done. So if you take the tract of just kind of doing a lot of things because they look good on a piece of paper, the reality is they might not look so good on a piece of paper. We do our best when we look at applications for officer candidate school or really everything else to really take a look at, all right, this person has done these things, but really how well have they done at it? And then the other thing is don't short sell, don't undercut the importance of the statement of why you're interested in doing what you're doing. We look at that very carefully as well. When a person talks about what their motivation is for joining the military, the degree of how genuine that is something that really does break itself out in a written application and when you talk in an interview. So just 2 key pieces.
I would just say if you have the ability to do it, to volunteer either on a political campaign or any community group. I mean, you just don't have to work for a U.S. Senate race or a presidential campaign, although you'd be surprised how much have influence. I mean, we had a guy, Ned Lamont, who beat U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman in a Democratic primary because of the work of students like yourself. I mean, they were the backbone of the reason why he was able to do that. But banging on doors and talking to real people, or whatever the issue it is, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's mass transit, whatever, it's just life experience, and you learn about how people work and live day to day, and I think that's just great experience.
Well, I just want to thank all 5 of you and Aaron Sweeney for moderating. It has been so helpful, great questions from students, and just thank you so much for participating.